this week, despite this crazy low pressure system coming in. This week's been a really good week here at our home. Both our boys came home recently. I went when Mark was here. That was when I was collecting my one son from college, and then the other guy came home on Monday. So there's a big change in our house. And I can be honest, my husband and I have gotten used to the quiet. It's a major distraction, and of course it's a nice one. And despite that, I observed that my regular way, sort of the natural fears that I walk around sort of floating in, there's 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows. They were there regardless of all the distraction. It's an interesting observation. And in my case, my particular ones, I'm worrying about loved ones with cancer. It's a worry and a fear. And then I read a couple of articles, I think in the Wall Street Journal, on the elections coming up in November, and that one sends me into an interesting place. So I find myself working with these feelings of fear all the time. And it's been part of my practice now for a couple of years. So in the case of the election, it's kind of interesting to observe because, I'm here and my mind moves to the future and my imagination is very vivid, and what if the outcome is not what I want, what I personally am looking for based on things that matter to me. And we have good friends who want the opposite that we do, and they're in a similar state of fear. Anyway, it reminded me, as I was thinking of that one, because that one for some reason brings a different energy to me. It reminded me of a teaching by Eckhart Tolle that I often go back to. He writes in The Power of Now, which is a great read. I think it's on Oprah Winfrey's side table, her bedside table, although maybe that was a couple years ago. But he writes in that book, and he teaches a lot in his talks. He says, when you're presented with an intolerable situation, you have only 3 options. Number 1, you change the situation. Number 2, you leave the situation. Or number 3, you accept the situation. Change it, leave it, or accept it. Those are your options. And he says any other option is insanity. Insanity. And the guys that I work with in prison have this thing that they often say, it is what it is. I've mentioned, these particular guys in this unit and the ladies as well, they're not hardened criminals. They've been doing things kind of to survive within that framework. And really, most of them I find find themselves in this very intolerable situation. Being incarcerated is actually intolerable. It's not what you think it is. It's very, very difficult. But it is what it is. They did what they did, taking responsibility and living in an intolerable situation. And by and large, acceptance moves the heart and the mind and even the body then to some state of freedom. Not physical freedom in that case, but anyway, all of this to say that today's topic I want to address, I'll call it managing your fear. Managing your fear. The former director of psychiatry at Stanford, guy named Dan Goway, he now has a private company. coaches people, I think. He writes of fear. He says, unmanaged fear is your primal brain, meaning your ancient brain, that animalistic brain, wrecking your sanity by saturating your higher brain, the prefrontal cortex, with stress hormones. Unmanaged fear. So I want to step back to a class that we had maybe, I don't know, it was a month or so ago, where I spoke about the emotions. And it was connected to that book on sleep, Natto, by Daniel Erickson. I'm a big fan of that amateur book. But I want to go back to that and just refresh our memories. That fear is an emotion, and it's an energetic reaction to an event or to a thought. So something's happening in our actual existence, or a thought is coming into our head. We have this energetic reaction, and it's called fear. And I'll put a sidebar here saying that anger and sadness are simply iterations of fear. Okay? So fear is the kind of core. Anger is that energy that gives you some propulsion. So it's you're going to fight or you're going to fly. You're angry. Usually you're going to fight, you're going to engage. So it's this energetic movement, but it's around fear. And sadness is also an energetic reaction, but it's that freeze. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to freeze up. But it's still, there's a fear that's underneath it. So fear, anger, sadness. Erickson spoke of in the psychological world, there's the 5 primal emotions: disgust, happiness, fear, anger, sadness. So I want to start with the unpleasant portion of it and move to the pleasant portion of it so we can end on a more positive note. And the unpleasant part of managing your fear is the fear, this emotion. And, again, I'll just go back to what we spoke of earlier. This emotion is part of our brain's toolbox. There's a practical purpose for our emotions. Because underneath this gorgeous prefrontal cortex that allows us to do so much, so many beautiful things, so many horrific things, underneath that, down in the base, is our animal brain. And it's a survival machine. And our emotions come out of there. That's where emotions arise from. And every cell in your body has this sort of primary purpose to survive. And fear is just this natural response to a threat. When there's a threat, the brain goes into a state of hyper or hypo arousal. And hyper arousal is when you want to fight or you want to get out. And hypo arousal is when you freeze up. You're not going to expend any more energy on that. Your system is saying, not worth it. So fear is a natural, very normal response to a threat. It's very normal to feel afraid a lot of the time because our brain is trying to keep us alive and to procreate, to make the species continue. Now, if you're human, there are 2 kinds of threats. I think if you're a dog, there's only one kind because the dogs, their brain is much smaller. Their capacity for emotions is extremely limited. There's two kinds of threats if you're human. There's what's called an imminent threat, and there's a perceived threat. So an imminent threat is when you are actually about to be hurt. Like you're walking down the street and somebody is approaching you in an aggressive manner. That's called an imminent threat. And a perceived threat is when you're using that gorgeous prefrontal cortex to imagine a future hurt. And it's very, very helpful for us, right? It can help us to stay safe. We can plan for things. You can lock your door to prevent someone from coming in. That's you're using that perceived threat process that you're so lucky to have for your well-being. And, the difference, I think you understand the difference, but I like the police check. I always go back to that, which is, are you safe right now? And you look around and you say yes or no. And so that's how you discern between an imminent and a perceived threat. But your primal brain, this core of you, doesn't actually know the difference. And so in either case, whether you're presented with an imminent threat or a perceived threat, the body's reaction is gonna be the same. Your body is gonna move into a zone of discomfort. Your brain is sending all kinds of hormones and chemicals into your body, tensing your muscles to get you to do something to save your life, to protect your hide. And, perceived threats are usually your brain's response to a perceived threat, something that you're thinking about, is much less intense. But it lasts and lasts, especially if you keep thinking about the thing. It kind of it keeps re-upping, it keeps restarting, right? And most things in our modern life are perceived threats and not imminent threats. Most of what we deal with on a day-to-day is perceived. And the problem nowadays, especially with media, the television, the radio, newspapers, internet, you have an endless supply of perceived threats. Endless. The scroll thing, ever since they invented the endless scroll, you can't get enough of perceived threats anymore. And you get into a habit. A mental habit of continually worrying. And it really can infuse other parts of your life. In this one, you don't need media to help with this one, but, will the cancer come back? You've taken some actions, but it's God's will at the end of the day. What happens? It's not an imminent threat at that moment. It's a perceived threat. It's a very difficult one. And the problem is when your nervous system stays in this state of fear, this hyper-arousal or hypo-arousal, depending on where your system's going, it harms you. It harms you. It harms your mental health. It harms your physical health. It harms your immune system. So if you're dealing with something physical where you need your immune system to be strong and to work on your behalf, that constant worry actually harms you. So you really have to discern between imminent threat and perceived threat. You have to do your check, even if it's inside your own body. And if you're able to discern the difference, if you can do that, then it's entirely within your power to gradually release yourself from this chronic grip of fear. I'll say a short word about the word your on managing your fear, because something did come to my mind on that. A quote from Thich Nhat Hanh. So if you were in a room full of people and you asked everybody in the room what worries you most about, what do you worry about most? You'll literally get a very different answer from everyone. There will be a lot of similarities and also a lot of specifics. And, this is because we all think that ours is the fear. You think yours is the fear, but it's actually your fear. It's based on the causes and conditions of your life, your physical life and your mental life. My husband worries about knees because he had knee surgery. I worry about teeth because I had dental surgery. He worries about the economy because he's an economist, and I worry about the environment because I'm a tree lover. So your fear is a specific emotion that's passing through your specific system. It's an emotion. Fear is not an actual thing. It's just an emotion. It's an energy. And Thich Nhat Hanh writes this. He writes on difficult emotions. We have to remind ourselves that we are more than a perception, perceived fear. We are more than a perception. A perception is impermanent. It comes and it stays for some time, and it will have to go. And that kind of insight we can transmit to ourselves. Maybe in the future, our mobile phones will have that function reminding us, dear friend, you are more than your emotion. You can handle your emotion with the practice of mindful breathing. You've already survived many strong emotions. You don't have to die just because of one emotion. So it's in your power to alleviate your suffering. You are the person who's going to know best, most intimately, what to do. Which brings us to the word manage. Manage. We manage our fear as mindfulness practitioners with mindfulness. And our training is we observe the body, we observe the mind, we observe the heart connected to the mind. And fear feels very uncomfortable in the body. For me, fear is this sort of tremulous feeling in my chest near the heart. So it kind of adds, kind of compounds on itself. I feel trapped. I feel tight. I have this kind of shaking inside. Sometimes it turns into an excitement. So I feel excited, but it's actually fear. It can also show up in this body, in my chest, in my shoulders. Like sometimes there's a pressure in the head. And these physical sensations, they're so uncomfortable, and it's our brain's tools. And we have to recognize that. It's your brain trying to save your life. So we take a step back with our mindfulness practice, and we understand what's happening physiologically. And I have a quote from the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, which I read while I was on retreat in February, with nothing in the way of me and my fear, no distractions. So I went to the library a couple times just looking for some help, and there's a book that really stands out in my mind. It was a very tiny little book, and the commentary was written by Goenka. Maybe you've heard of this guy. He's the founder of those 10-day Vipassana retreats that you read about. People sometimes write about them in the magazines. But in the commentary of the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, he writes the following: mind and body are so closely interrelated that the contents of the mind always manifest themselves as sensations in the body. For this reason, the Buddha said, and forgive my pronunciation here, Vedana samosarana sabbe dhamma. Translation: everything that arises in the mind flows together with physical sensations. Therefore, observation of physical sensations offers a means, indeed the only means, to examine the totality of your being, physical as well as mental. Meaning everything, even in our mind, is happening in the present moment, in our actual life. Something that we're perceiving that might happen in the future is actually happening to us right now in our body. This is why we get so upset. Because you're like, well, why should I worry so much? It's because it's physically happening to you right now in your body. Your brain is using its tools to get you to save your life. So the teaching is, when a difficult thought or emotion comes up, we stay with it. We take care of it. You don't judge yourself for having it. It's human to have it. You don't run away. Sometimes you have to run away because it's just too much, but then the next time you try and stay with it. And you just remember that it's normal and that you really have to tend to yourself with a lot of care. And when I wonder how do I add some care to this situation, I always look to Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings. And Thich Nhat Hanh always teaches you come back to the present moment with a breath. One inhale and one exhale is enough to come back to the present moment. People get lost in their worries and their fears. Lost. It's like you're in a dream of fear. And with that mindfulness practice, we just come back and we show up in our actual life. He has a teaching where he's eating an orange or a mandarin or something like that with a friend, and he notices his friend is just eating away, kind of thinking about his projects or whatever it is he's thinking about. And he encourages his friend. He reminds him, he says, hey, you're eating a beautiful piece of fruit. Be with that. Like, see that beautiful orange color. And the skin breaks open, and then you smell that smell. And then with your fingers, you take apart the different pieces. And then you put them in your mouth, and it's an explosion of flavor and texture. And show up for your life. And he encourages us to do that, when we wake up in the morning. You have 24 hours to practice mindfulness. And so when you wake up in the morning, maybe trying to envision how you might practice as you get on with your day. Practice being mindful, showing up.